Hello there, everybody. How you doing? Wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit today about the Ted Bundy tapes. I just watched it on Netflix and found it tremendously interesting. You know, it kind of starts off talking about his childhood and stuff. For those of you who don't know, I mean, it's basically a reporter who was able to go in and interview Ted Bundy and took a recorder with him and stuff, and he was able to talk with Ted and get Ted to talk on tape. And I'll tell you, there's some interesting things. I mean, I was very, very fascinated with, hearing some of the things that Ted was saying. Of course, Ted is 100% guilty. There's no question of that here for me, really. But what I found interesting was, I'll get to the parts I find interesting about what that reporter got him to say later. I want to start out talking about at the beginning when it's talking about his childhood. Thought that was interesting. You guys remember, or I don't know if those of you who watched it, you remember the part at the beginning when he's talking about, he hunted frogs. He talks about how you would see the eyes, above the water, and he said he caught all kinds of frogs, and he was going as far as to call himself a frog man. He's trying to, build up the grandeur around, hunting frogs essentially, and, plus hunting frogs. I mean, that's, animals, I don't think it'd be interesting to know if they were actually eating like frogs' legs for dinner. If he was catching frogs and they were having frog legs for dinner. He did come from a poor family, so maybe that could be. But most likely he was just doing it because he was a kid and he was just, he was, being a kid or whatever. But they always say, that's a lot. I mean, when it would seem to have been his favorite pastime is killing frogs or, whatever and all that. So, I mean, that's a little bit weird, and they say that's how a lot of, serial killers start out is they have something like that with animals in their past, even though it's just a frog. It's not like a beloved family pet or anything. But, I just still think it's kind of interesting that he had that kind of thing going with animals at a young age. Now, it doesn't even just stop there with Ted. Go a little further into his childhood, and he's going to like Boy Scout camp or whatever it is and all that stuff. And they talk about how Ted would dig these tiger traps. He would dig these holes and then put like sharpened sticks in the bottom and then cover the top with leaves and brush and branches and stuff or whatever. And actually one girl did fall into one of his tiger traps one time, and she cut herself really bad, apparently all the way up the right side of her leg, on her right leg, like whatever it was that he had in the pit just gouged all the way up her leg, apparently. I mean, really bad. I mean, so that's another thing. I mean, we got Ted Bundy building tiger traps, trying to seriously injure the kids that he's going to camp with and stuff. So those were some interesting things that I went, okay, he clearly did have some issues at a young age, and I found it interesting that they talked about how he wasn't really good at sports, he wasn't really into sports, but yet later on, as he was becoming a young adult and he was, everything, he would try to sell himself as like this sporty guy and all that sort of thing. I mean, he was always trying to build up his own grandeur. It's like, I mean, it was just like this guy was a legend in his own mind, really. And that kind of narcissistic kind of tendency could lead me to, kind of explains, why this guy ended up, becoming the horrific serial killer that he became. So I just found all those things interesting. So then we get to the part where we got the gentleman that's coming in to talk to Ted. And he's, he's, they're talking, they're chit-chatting or whatever. And then at one point he tells Ted, hey Ted, look, you've gone to college and you've taken psychiatry courses. He was actually in law school when he got arrested, from what I understand. And, so this guy was going you understand this. You understand psychiatric profiling and all that stuff. And I can't imagine anything that would be more helpful to you than you being your own expert witness. So maybe you could try to profile this killer a little bit, and maybe that could be helpful or whatever. And Ted, he describes Ted at that point. well, first Ted says, well, that would be kind of difficult, but then he describes how Ted suddenly warmed up to the idea. He grabbed the tape recorder, right? And he had the tape recorder, right? And he was like, the guy described him as like cradling it, and he just started like talking into it, almost like making love to it, you know, like weird, dude, right? Strange, very odd and weird. So, but that to me tells me that he was relishing in being able to talk about his crimes. Okay? That's what that said to me. Then, move on to the fact. Listen to how he was profiling it. Okay? Think about when they're profiling somebody, right? They're using rough things from what they've seen in the crimes, certain things to kind of guess at certain tendencies, certain personality traits, because of, you know, whatever, maybe the violence or the brutality of the crime, or various little issues or certain little things about the crime scene that profilers are able to glean some information from. But what Ted was doing was being far too specific. I mean, he was profiling it like he was trying to profile it. But he was clearly letting the fact that he knew all the detail leak into his profiling, because his profiling, in my opinion, was far too detailed. And that to me proves even further Ted Bundy did it. Ted Bundy, you know, was the guy who committed all these heinous murders. But I just found it interesting the way that he couldn't help himself. He couldn't really. He picked up that recorder, and, you know, the chance to talk about his crimes, like you know, the way that the guy talked about him cradling the recorder and stuff and talking into it was just wow to me. So, remember what I'm saying here now about the way he liked to talk about his crimes. The way he did with the guy who came in to interview him when the guy asked him to kind of profile this killer, right? And we see how Ted goes there. Then skip forward to the trial in Florida, okay, where Ted is his own counsel. He's the head of 4 other public defenders that have been assigned to him, and he's basically the head of them because, you know, and the judge made him the head of the defense team, and very, very strange stuff. But yeah, so we have that. Okay, now, as I was saying, the way he got about the opportunity to profile himself and giving him a chance to talk about his crimes on tape in a way that he feels detached from it. I don't know if he realizes just how much he was telling on himself or not, but that relish that he has, right? So when he's in court and he's cross-examining the officer that found the 2 girls at the Chi Omega sorority house where that had been killed by him, basically. So he was asking that detective to describe that scene in gory detail, in every bit of gory detail. For what reason? How does that help your case, Ted? I mean, how does talking about all that detail create any? How does that work? How does that? I mean, I just don't understand what he was thinking there, other than he just couldn't help himself. He just got up there and he had the opportunity to ask that cop who had found all of his handiwork, as he, you know, probably thought of it. And so he had a chance to ask that cop a bunch of uncomfortable questions and make that cop uncomfortable, make everybody in the courtroom squirm as he described those things and everything. I think he just couldn't resist the opportunity to relish in the chaos and the everything that he had created. That's what I think about. That's basically what I think about Ted Bundy there. I mean, I found the Bundy tapes to be quite interesting. I mean, I'm probably going to watch it again and maybe even do a second little video to kind of, you know, analyze it a little further. But I got to say, it's very interesting for those people who are intrigued by, you know, that kind of, you know, mental, you know, issues like this guy has, or, you know, anything like that. I mean, it's quite interesting watching Ted Bundy trying to act innocent, but yet he can't hide it. He can't hold it in because he's too proud of himself. He's too proud of what he's done, and he just can't. He's like a dog for a bone. He can't help himself. I think that's certainly true with what happened in Utah, in Aspen. I mean, he was on trial there. He escaped twice. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, basically, the first time he jumps out of a window, a second floor window at the courthouse, because he was allowed to sit in the law library and whatever, because he was obviously, working on his case. And he jumped out of a second-story window, ended up wandering around in the mountains. It was cold. He even describes it in the show as he was in shock because the temperature got so cold that he actually started going into shock and everything. And he ended up having to walk right back into town and got caught. And then when he was being held again for trial, he was able to sneak out through a ceiling fixture in his cell and crawl above the cells, and he was able to get into a deputy's office. He was able to put on a deputy's outfit, and then he just walked right out the front doors. And that's when he started making his way to Florida. So, yeah, it's pretty obvious, dude, when you watch the trail. I mean, this guy, Ted Bundy is, quite an amazing, character, and by saying that, I don't mean anything to be admired, really, but I mean, he had no conscience, man. It would seem, just no conscience with that guy. He and then you look at him pouring on the charm and the charisma, whenever he's in front of the cameras, when he's on trial and stuff, and he's just pouring on that charm and charisma, and he thought he could charm, and he thought he could charm his way out of that. It's interesting, and you could clearly tell he charmed the judge in Florida, because the judge in Florida, even though he sentenced him to death basically and everything, he actually ends up saying to Ted, "It's too bad that you chose this lifestyle or whatever, because you're very articulate and you have a great legal mind or whatever, and I'd love to see you arguing in my courtroom again, but you chose this lifestyle or whatever, and so you've made your bed, and whatever, basically you're gonna have to lie in it." So but you could clear, even that judge was affected by Ted's charm. Crazy. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts about Ted Bundy after watching the Ted Bundy tapes. Like I said, I may do another one after I rewatch it, maybe in a couple weeks or something, but I just got to say, anybody that hasn't checked it out, maybe you should. It's pretty interesting stuff. To kind of really see what was going on in that guy's head. Very, very, very interesting. So like I said, I advise everybody to watch it if you have an interest in that type of stuff and true crime and all that. It's very interesting. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.